Hey there, it's Joey. Let's get EDH wrecked. Last December, I made the dumbest deck ever, a 5-color, monocolor, colorless deck. And no, this isn't some silly bracket 1 pipe dream. This deck actually works. I mean, it's a very goofy concept, but it still plays very solidly and very competently. It's holding its own very handily against other bracket 2 decks. It's playing really well against even like modern precons, the Hearthful deck, the Omo precon, the supercharged Strixhaven decks that are out there. It's doing really well even against those. As silly as this deck sounds, it is actually working. I'm excited to show you this deck, but this video isn't just going to be about that, because I am also kind of shocked that I was able to make it. As silly as this concept is, the fact that I was even able to brew this deck in the first place is, I feel, kind of indicative of current Magic and Commander-focused design trends in a way that I just think maybe warrants a little bit of extra careful scrutiny. So let's look at the deck, but then let's also look at what this deck means. So yeah, let's get to it. Why am I calling this a 5-color, monocolor, colorless deck? Well, check it out. This here is Heibai, a 5-color Shrines commander that costs green to cast, but has an activated ability that gives it access to play all 5 colors in the body of the 99. This commander finally represented a competitor to the classic Go Shintai of Life's Origin Shrine commander, and it's quite a strong competitor. Heibai has a very compelling enter the battlefield ability to flip cards from your deck until you find a shrine and put that right into play. And we've probably all seen a Shrines deck before. We know how they tend to work. It snowballs into a lot of triggers that will eventually just take the whole board over with tons of tokens and tons of value. So just a 5-color commander deck, right? Well, here's the twist that I put in. The only lands that I'm playing in this list are wastes. No other basic lands, no color fixing lands, no other colorless utility lands even. Just wastes. Canonically, the Heibai Guardian gets very mad that its forest has been completely demolished, so I wanted to portray that lore just a little bit. And that means that the only way that I can make colored mana in this list is with mana rocks and mana filter cards. I went through the whole lot of mana rocks and found my favorites that help me to cast my commander and flip for more shrines. And I'm not even playing like other colorless instants and sorceries or things like Eldrazi, so these mana rocks are the only way that I can make mana to cast the spells in my deck. And what spells am I casting exactly? Well, this is where the monocolor part of the deck description comes in. The other important ingredient to this deck is, of course, blink effects. Retriggering Heibai's ETB ability as many times as possible with Cloud Shift, Ephemerate, Personify, Airbending effects, Flicker of Fate, Teleportation Circle, and more. The only cards in the deck that aren't shrines are all white cards, things to help me out with removal, but also to help me blink my commander as much as possible. Well, and maybe a Conjurer's Closet in there too. Of particular importance is the card Skybind, which triggers Constellation whenever an enchantment enters your battlefield. That will blink Heibai, who will come back on the end step. And when entering the battlefield, Heibai will dig for another shrine. That's an enchantment entering, so that will trigger the Constellation of Skybind once more to flicker Heibai, who will come back in on the next end step, getting another shrine, triggering Constellation to blink Heibai again, lather, rinse, repeat, and you'll get all of those shrines out very, very quickly with this setup. This card is so clutch in any Heibai deck. I could theoretically play more than just white blink spells in this list. You know, an Essence Flux or a Ghostly Flicker or a Teferi's Time Twist would be suitable for this deck for sure. But like I said, I'm building a kind of dumb deck. My color restriction here is sort of the point. And yeah, this deck actually works. It really does. Casting Heibai is not always done exactly on tempo because most of the mana rocks here are going to be 3 mana, but it is still very, very possible to cast the commander, get a shrine, and then within the next turn blink it once or even twice for suddenly a lot more shrines in play, whose effects will all begin to snowball. The blue shrines will feed you more cards. The green Sanctum gives more mana. Several of these shrines make lots and lots and lots of tokens over time to protect life totals at first, but then to overwhelm the board later on. And in terms of win conditions, I mean, once you have a lot of shrines in play, we all know that Sanctum of Stone Fangs is a very classic shrine endpoint, but the new white temple also helps to buff up all of the 1/1s that this deck is capable of making, since there are like 4 or 5 shrines that make tokens. At a certain point, turns just become letting all of the shrine triggers resolve, and your opponent slowly realizing that, oh, they're about to be crushed by this value avalanche. I will note real quick that there are 5 shrines I'm not playing, 1 of each color. Sanctum of Stone Heights is kinda mid, for instance. The blue milling one isn't very necessary for me, and the Kyoshi Island Plaza is uncharacteristically bad in this list, since since this is a deck that only has wastes to search up. I am still playing the most dangerous shrine, that being the blue Honden, which famously can deck you out, because that draw trigger is not a May ability. But I enjoy playing it here, even if it's not advisable, because I just like living on the edge. If you would like to know more about how this deck actually works, I've started adding primers to my lists on Archidect, and I'm actually not the only one. I know that my colleague Matt has started doing the same. If you want to check out this deck list, or any of my lists, or my colleagues' decks, there's a link to all of them below, and I hope that these primers can just be a little extra something to help you out if you have any other further curiosities about the decision points within the deck, or their overall mission, or the most clutch play patterns to lean into, or any further explanation about why it is that we sometimes choose certain cards over others when brewing these lists. Also, a brief shout out to the channel Reminder Text, who did a video recently about a deck that he made with a very similar concept to this one, though his color bending was going in the opposite direction of my example here. I just think it's really cool for people to play around with deck colors in this way, and I'm curious to hear from other folks out there what other decks they've made that are also playing around with color availability and different color options in unusual ways. You know, a mono white Rigo, a mono black Olero, and only Boros Kenrith. Those concepts are very, very cool. I'd love to see more of these. If you have any color bending that you're doing in your own brewing, shout out your ideas below, and if you feel so inclined, consider making like Krark and giving this video your thumbs, or subscribing for even more videos like this one, or supporting the channel over on patreon.com/edhrecast for even more cool perks. Anyway, yes, I have actually experienced a surprising amount of success with this deck. It's weird, it's dumb, it's restricted in like 3 different ways, but it was really enjoyable to brew. Who doesn't love a creative limitation, right? However, it was also kind of weird that I could even put it together. And that's really what I would like to talk about. What does it mean that I could have this pipe dream of a deck actually function extremely well? How was that even possible? After a couple of quick words from channel sponsors, I'd love to dig into this about what a deck like this being possible to build and also being competent when you do build it reveals about the Commander format. This episode is sponsored by Fabletics. Now that it's finally spring, I've been going outside a whole lot more, walking more, making plans, traveling more, doing things to make sure that I get out of my little editing dungeon here and actually experiencing the real world, And every time that this season hits, I always realize that I want more clothes that fit this season, that fit with moving around more, but that updating your wardrobe gets really expensive really fast. So I start asking around for better options, and my co-host Matt suggests Fabletics, and at first I'm like, I don't know, I'll take a look, maybe. And then I immediately realized that, oh no, he's absolutely right. This is a great call, especially because when signing up as a new VIP with Fabletics, you'll get 70 to 80% off everything on that first purchase. That sure makes it easy to grab and try out a few new pieces, right? The quality is great. It feels premium, breathable, built to last, but you're not paying those premium brand prices. What I like most is how versatile everything is. It's not just activewear and loungewear. No, you've got pieces that you could work out in, but also wear out. Matching sets, lightweight hoodies, joggers, tees, the kind of stuff that you can just throw on in the morning and then not have to think about it too hard again throughout the day. Shop now at fabletics.com/edhrec to get 70 to 80% off everything when you sign up as a new VIP. Take a quick style quiz and be sure to select EDHREC when prompted to unlock this offer. This is a limited time offer, so don't wait. Again, that's fabletics.com/edhrec for 70 to 80% off everything as a new VIP. This show is sponsored by Dragon Shield, makers of the best card sleeves you'll ever find, with officially licensed magic art from beautiful fetchlands to popular commanders. They also have a great scanner app if you'd like to track your collection, and it is wicked snappy fast. If you visit Dragon Shield, use code EDHREC, all lowercase, for a discount, and consider checking out their custom sleeves while you're at it. There's custom EDHREC sleeves, but also you can make your own. One of my buddies has been doing this for all of his decks, and it's honestly really sick to see during a game. Anyway, that's code EDHREC for a discount, and thank you to Dragon Shield for sponsoring the channel. Alrighty, back to it. So I put several limitations on that Hey Bye list, and while that deck's not going to be winning any bracket 4 games anytime soon, it is kind of wild that a commander came out where I could totally flatten its mana base, force myself to only make colored mana if I was able to draw mana rocks, and also only use spells of one of the 5 colors available to me, And I'm still able to get out like at least 6 shrines per game whenever I play it. That's wild, right? Heibai's ability just is that good. I don't even need to care about the tap ability thing. I can just repeat that ETB effect over and over and over again, and the dosage will make the poison. But it occurred to me that this isn't the only commander I've built in recent years with an ability that feels like this. And I think that maybe some of these other examples might be instructive or illustrative to help us discover something about how Commander is being made these days. And that type of awareness, I hope, will help us all to get better at finding the types of commanders that we each most resonate with, rather than seeing a commander, thinking that we might like it, building it, and then discovering after just a game or two that maybe it's actually not what we were looking for long term after all. So what does this silly Heibai list remind me of and reflect in my own personal deck building recently? Well, I'll refer you to this previous video about my Marina deck. Marina is also 5 colors, and she also has a very strong ability when she hits the field, checking your top 7 and keeping all enchantments from those. She doesn't keep just room cards, which she can lock or unlock for free, and which is the main reason I wanted to build her in the first place. No, she keeps all enchantments from that top 7. And as I built her, I watched as the deck that I had been excited to make into a full rooms list turned instead into a regular old enchantress deck, where I barely cared what enchantments I was even casting, because the best plays were to just cast any enchantment, regardless of what it was, so as to trigger enchantress effects. And also the best plays were to blink Marina with instants and cards like Teleportation Circle, so that she would enter again and dig for more and more and more enchantment cards. In that video, I called this phenomenon an archetypal abstraction, where the exact details and nuances of what makes a commander unique get eroded over time until it starts to feel a little more generically like it could be any deck of that archetype. This didn't feel like a rooms deck to me anymore, it just felt like the platonic nondescript ideal of an enchantress deck. And as I say in that video, I wasn't personally satisfied with that version of gameplay for that deck. It's just not what I liked about Marina or about her story. So that's why I put huge limitations on that list to keep the focus on the actual locking and unlocking of the room cards, which is really the thing that was actually the most fun for me. It was less powerful, but it was more fun, more unique, and more befitting the style of gameplay that I was actually after. All of that sounds very similar to what I just went through with Heibai here, a commander that has an extremely powerful enter the battlefield ability, whose optimal plays are most often to blink it whenever you can, rather than ever needing to worry about its tap effect, and whose archetype can sometimes feel like its lines of play are a little bit pre-written, like the commander is just falling down a marble run. Only this time, I preemptively put restrictions on how it is that I would build the deck, because I could already tell just at a glance how powerful it would be if I didn't. How if I didn't manually force some limitation on this commander's capabilities, then following the natural signs that the commander is giving would just organically lead to that archetype abstraction and the feeling that the deck was going to be less personal than what I was craving. Side note, I need to have a talk with my past self, because why do I write such long sentences in these videos? But that is not the only supporting example here. Oh, no. I also built Celis last year, who, upon entry, wheels as many cards in your hand as you would like. She also buffs up your team when stuff enters from your graveyard, which is the main thing that I was interested in. I built her as a domino reanimator deck, where I would fill my graveyard and then bring back, say, a Karmic Guide, to then get back a Metamorphosis Fanatic, which would then revive a Sun Titan, targeting Animate Dead, to revive an Angel of Indemnity, etc., etc. And the whole time, Celis sees these creatures coming back from the graveyard and wants to put +1 counters on the team for each creature that enters from the yard. Fun fact, actually, you can stack her triggers very creatively here. Let's say Karmic Guide brought back the Fanatic. Celis and the Fanatic will both trigger upon that battlefield entry. Order Fanatic's trigger to resolve first before Celis's buff resolves, and the Fanatic will then bring back another creature, like, say, that Sun Titan. Celis will trigger again, but so does the Sun Titan. So again, you stack it so that the Sun Titan effect resolves first, with now 2 triggers of Celis wanting to buff the team, waiting in the wings for all of the commotion to settle down. Ordering things that way, when you finally assemble the full team, Celis will just put the same number of counters on everyone, rather than needing to track different counters for each creature entering at different times. This is a huge riot to me, and it makes a very strong board in a very small amount of time. I wanted to build Celis this way because A, I just love reanimating and this was a funny new take on it for me, but also B, because I know that Celis got immediately famous for enabling persist combos. Sacrifice like a murderous red cap and then it will come back with a minus counter on it. Celis sees that it entered from the yard, puts a +1 counter on everyone, that negates the -1 counter, so then you can sacrifice the red cap again, which will come back again. again, yada yada, lather, rinse, repeat. You've gone infinite very easily here with your commander. I didn't want that dynamic for my own gameplay here, so I went with a different Domino Reanimator route. But despite all that, the fact remains that this commander still has the same thing going on as my past 2 deck examples do. A ridiculously good enter the battlefield ability that ultimately ends up shifting a huge priority of the deck's natural tendencies towards blink spells. Because by just casting 1 Cloud Shift, you can dump like 5 cards into the yard and draw 6 more. Like, if you think Stitcher Supplier is good, getting 6 cards in the graveyard for 1 mana, girl, you ain't seen nothing yet. You blink a Celas 1 time and get back to me. It is so addictive because you get so much in your graveyard and you draw so many. This is a huge amount of card selection. Plus, if you have a high enough density of these effects in your list, then usually you'll end up drawing into another blink spell, so then you can do it all over again. And most importantly, since Celas's wheel effect here is selective, not a full force the entire hand to get discarded, you get to craft your hand very carefully. You get to sculpt things. This is a wild amount of selection to get from this commander. And like, I sound so excited about it because, yeah, this is really good value. I am kind of giddy to see these synergies go so wild. But also, abilities like this one ultimately make it so that, despite me trying to build a Celas deck in a way that avoided the combo levels of broken that she's capable of, building her in a way that I just thought would be kind of cool, I am still winding up with a deck that is much stronger than I meant for it to be. But honestly, how could I be surprised by any of this? How could any of this come as a shock to anybody? We've already seen these exact patterns play out before with a commander like Tivit, who says that he cares about voting, but he doesn't, really. He cares about being blinked so that he can make a ton of tokens at a time. We've seen it with Atraxa, who draws you a bajillion cards upon entry, and who would love to keep a blink spell from among those, thank you very much, so that she can spin the wheels again and again and again. We've seen it with Kefka, forcing discard, but also drawing a ton of cards whenever he enters over and over too. We've seen these patterns play out over and over again. I just happened to oops into them with some of the commanders that I happen to have been drawn towards lately. So, okay, Joe, what's my own lesson here, right? Are blink spells just the most underrated MVPs and way more broken than people think they are? No, that's not my lesson here, although those cards are workhorses for sure. I mean, just repeating a Legends ETB ability is clearly a strong enough thing that probably more people should pay attention to, but also using them to dodge removal spells is also a really solid trick, so yeah, maybe give blink spells a little bit more attention, sure. But no, that's not the takeaway. The thing that is worth acknowledging here is something that's been true for the past several years, but that is especially stark here in 2026, that even if you're trying to not build a commander as that deck in a very optimal way, you still might accidentally be building a commander that is going to perform optimally anyway. Sometimes these commanders are so self-contained in their abilities, so just dang good, that all they need is a slight nudge to start taking over and snowballing an entire commander game. This puts me in mind of comments that you see a whole lot online from folks who are saying, you don't have to build things super optimally. You don't have to tune every deck up. You can just brew to have fun. Yes, I agree. Yes, and I built Heibai and Marina in ways that are intentionally very dumb, and those decks are still competent. Yes, and I did that with Celas. I avoided her most broken form. I took aim at a version of Reanimation that I thought I would enjoy that was synergistic but not optimal, and it's still a more powerful deck than I meant it to be. Yes, and how on earth could you ever build a Witherbloom deck or a Vivi deck in a goofy way? Look at my evil twin Maldhound. He tried to build Vivi as bracket 2, and check out our Hijinks episode to see how quickly that deck still managed to kick things off. Yes, and even when you do figure out how to build your deck in a way that isn't the most optimal and that is just brewing for fun, you're then going to encounter opponents who hopefully have done the same things, but who also have those same types of commanders who, with just a small nudge, might accidentally end up being stronger than they meant them to be as well. That's just the type of commanders that are seeing print. Frankly, the phenomenon I'm talking about here is so not new. I've seen mono-red Najeela lists that still absolutely take over a game the same way that a Krenko deck would. I think it would be super easy to take that new Ashling commander and also make its mana base only wastes, and for that commander to still do a dang good job taking over a battlefield. Maybe the feeling here just ends up being that there are some commanders who just will always feel like they are bracket 3 commanders no matter how you build them. Or if you don't care for the brackets, just they're decks that are extremely hard to turn into something easygoing. I bet that there are a lot of players who might feel that way. For instance, as a personal example here, whenever I look at a Chatterfang Squirrel general deck, I personally feel a little bit apprehensive about whether or not that could be a bracket 2 or an easygoing deck. Like, while Squirrels sounds like it should be silly, Chatterfang ultimately is a 3-mana doubling season effect with a sacrifice outlet and removal engine that also has evasion that you'll always have access to in your command zone. You know what I mean? The individual examples don't necessarily matter here, but the important thing is that if you do feel that some commanders simply resist easygoing, fun builds, the point then worth addressing is that those types of commanders feel like they are getting more and more common, or perhaps more and more exaggerated over time. Witherbloom and Vivi are new cards, but this is not a new phenomenon. I just mentioned Chatterfang, and that's been around for years now. And let's be real, are any of the examples that I've used today of my own personal decks, are any of those things, the Heybais, the Sellas, the whatever, so concerningly powerful that they made you more worried about them than if there was a Yuriko across the table from you? Nar? I think not. That, I think, is the whole of it. Commanders are individual art pieces that attempt to tell a story and evoke strong feeling by fusing mechanics with narrative. But they are also fish that must address the water they're swimming in if they're going to survive it. They are influenced heavily by the context that surrounds them. Heibai didn't come out of nowhere. Heibai has a strong set of abilities so as to make it a compelling alternative to Go Shintai of Life's origin. Go Shintai and its many deck lists were a large object at rest. So if you want that Go Shintai to budge, if you want it to no longer be the default, you have to make something strong so that you can exert a decent amount of force for that thing to move at all, let alone for the new thing to be able to pick up any momentum. Similarly, Celis's abilities are informed by the fact that she was playing support to the leader of a precon. That deck, the Terra precon, needed some extra help getting things into the graveyard, and also turning Terra's revival of tiny creatures into something more properly lethal. It just turns out that, well, when Celis was taken out of the context of that precon, she's very good on her own. And Marina? She was made in the context of wanting a commander for a brand new mechanic, the rooms. But that requirement meant acknowledging that rooms as a new mechanic aren't exactly strong enough to carry a deck concept all on their own. They're good, they're cool, but they are not necessarily cohesive. So if you're a designer making a card like Marina, just unlocking rooms doesn't end up being enough. So you decide to open that door a little wider. No pun intended. But then, that's not all. These commanders are not just made on their own, they're made with an awareness of the power of their contemporaries and their potential opposition. You know, the Chatterfangs and Vayrens and Sithises of the world. So if you as a designer think that the Marina player is already potentially going to be the last one to play their commander, and that a rogue board wipe could mean that she gets removed before she even taps to do anything, well now that player would be even more behind, which would be a huge disappointment in player experience that Wizards is clearly keen to avoid. And an easy way to avoid that is to make her have a compelling enter the battlefield ability. That's also why so many commander designs have shifted to end of turn abilities nowadays instead of having upkeep abilities. And that ultimately is how we're going to end up with commanders who have abilities that gesture towards one theme, but could actually end up being way more powerful than they were intended to be. That are so easy to abuse with very minor input from the person who's piloting them. Where just a simple 1-mana cloud shift can make any of these commanders explode by drawing you tons of cards or giving you tons of mana and tons of tokens. And those things end up being so powerful that it takes more willpower for players to avoid those types of synergies for those commanders. None of this is necessarily criticism of how the sausage gets made. My goal here is just to acknowledge that these realities have knock-on effects later on in gameplay for players. Like, all in all, it is truly rad that I could make a Heibai deck with these comically large limitations and still feel like it works. I do enjoy living in a commander world where that goofy stuff is possible. I just also recognize that the reason it's possible is because certain facets of the game and game design have reached power thresholds that very naturally, organically tip into play patterns that are a lot stronger than I think the designers even mean them to be sometimes, which then flows to you and your responsibilities as a player, where your deck could accidentally end up being so much better than you meant it to be, even when you were trying to not make it that powerful. I think we've been here for a while now, but 2026 feels to me like the point where it's becoming the most clear that we as players are very officially a deeply important and proactive final ingredient in what a commander's abilities actually are, what their text box really says. My Heibai deck basically doesn't have a tap ability. It just has a bunch of cards in the deck that say 1 mana, find another free shrine. For a lot of players, Edgar Markov basically doesn't have an attack trigger, because the very natural way to make that that deck do stuff means they almost never actually need to cast him. Some Lathril decks will forget that their commander even has an activated ability, because they'll do so much more damage another way. Or plenty of Satya decks don't give a crap about energy counters at all and just enjoy all of the tokens that it can make. Or like, I can't even remember the last time that I've seen a Xyrus deck that ever actually used its damage trigger, because just wheeling one time is usually enough for that commander to win a game. But that also means that if you want to, there's a very easy solution to begin building these types of commanders in sillier ways. A solution that doesn't always mean that you have to build a 5-color deck with only white spells and wastes for its mana base. Nothing so extreme as that. Instead, you as the brewer end up shifting your focus from one of a commander's abilities to the other of its abilities. Brew Xyrus with only its attack trigger as the way to force extra card draw at the table. Don't play any wheels in the deck. Or build Edgar Markov where he does hit play a lot of the time, where you aren't trying to proc his 1/1 token ability as much as possible, but instead you're trying to proc his attack trigger more often. Avoid the siren song of blinking Tivit to get a bunch of tokens, and just play voting cards without any other ways to make him leave and re-enter play. Commanders have a bunch of text on them these days, but shifting focus from one of their paragraphs to another, I think is the easiest way to begin to tune towards the power level that you will enjoy most with a legend that you like. Just be sure to communicate this very clearly to the pod before you play, because when a commander is famously broken, everyone else is going to be very reasonably hesitant and will probably need a little bit of proof of what you're selling. These responsibilities have always been in our hands as a player base. It just happens that as commander designs have evolved in this specific way, now that responsibility has gotten a lot more exaggerated over time. And while I do have some criticism for the ways in which certain commanders are made in those ways, an enormous silver lining of this reality is that it does make the decision points for us as players a lot more obvious in the ways that we can choose to lean in or to pull back the reins in different moments, and to better adjust for the types of games that we're actually the most excited to play. And while I hope that Wizards doesn't print too many more commanders where I could play only wastes, but the legend is so strong that I could make a competent deck from it, I am, at the very least, happy to have learned some good lessons from this one. In other words, I built a pretty dumb deck, and it was a lot of fun. But also, Wizards, please don't make it too easy for me to build a bunch more of them. Let me know any color-bendy decks that you've been tinkering around with, and if you enjoyed this video, please consider helping out the channel by liking, subscribing, or checking out some perks over at patreon.com/EDHRECast. Thank you to Dragon Shield for sponsoring this video, thanks to you for watching, and as always, remember, EDH wreck your deck before you wreck your deck.